Let's talk about a really powerful metaphor for how society changes. It all boils down to one simple question. How do you melt super thick ice? Not with a sledgehammer, but with something as gentle as a spring wind. Okay, let's dive right in. So the author kicks things off by painting this picture of Lake Anasime in the dead of winter. And get this, the ice is a foot thick. We're talking solid enough for a truck to drive on it. Think about that for a second. But this isn't just about a frozen lake, right? This image is meant to show us just how massive, how seemingly impossible the problem really is. All right, so there it is, this giant slab of ice. How in the world do you melt it? I mean, when you're up against something that huge, that solid, what's the game plan? This is the core question. And trust me, the answer is probably not what you're thinking. Okay, and here's the twist. Of course, we're not really talking about a frozen lake. This whole time, that incredibly vivid image, it's all a metaphor. The thick ice stands for something else, something you can't see, but is just as real and just as tough to break. So, what is this thick ice? In the original text, it's called jianbing, which literally translates to firm ice. And it's a stand-in for what the author calls Civilization 2.0. Basically, it's our current operating system as a society. You know, all the rigid ways of thinking, the social rules we just accept without question, the ideas that have been frozen solid for generations. They feel permanent, unchangeable. And this is absolutely key. Where is this ice? It's not out there in the world somewhere. You can't go find it and take a pickaxe to it. The author says this ice, it's inside of us. It's in our hearts and in our minds. It's an ideological barrier. And you just can't punch your way through an idea, can you? Okay, so if the problem is this firm ice inside our heads, what's the solution? You can't fight it with force. Well, the author gives us an answer that's just as poetic as the problem: a spring wind. So what is this spring wind? Turns out the spring wind, or chunfeng, is actually information. It's an idea. More specifically, it represents the new ways of thinking laid out in a text called Introduction to Human Civilization 3.0. The whole concept is that this new philosophy is the gentle but unstoppable force that can create that thaw. The wind is literally the spread of these new ideas. So we've got our two main players, the frozen mindset and the gentle wind of new ideas. But how does one actually affect the other? How does this whole melting process work? And this is a big deal, the author insists that how you do it is everything. First, let's talk about what not to do. The author is super clear on this. You can't just bomb the ice. You can't set it on fire. You can't get a bunch of people to smash it with hammers. You can't even bring in a giant icebreaker ship. Why? Because all of that is force, it's coercion. And that stuff is totally useless when you're trying to change an idea. In fact, trying to force people to change their minds will almost always just make them dig in their heels even more. So, if force is out, what's the right way? Well, it's actually a pretty simple three-step method. First, you just spread the ideas. You get the Introduction to Human Civilization 3.0 out there everywhere. Second, you let that spring wind do its thing. You let it blow into people's hearts and minds. And the third step, which might be the hardest, you wait. You have to be patient. And that patience piece is non-negotiable. This quote says it all, right? The thick ice doesn't just disappear in a day or two. Think back to that real lake. Spring doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, gradual process. The sun comes out a little more each day. The wind blows consistently. That's how this works too. The spring wind has to keep blowing, day after day, until the change happens. And what's the end goal? What does success look like? It's this beautiful vision, a lake that's completely thawed out, with water rippling, full of life, geese and ducks playing around. It's a metaphor for a totally new state of human consciousness, what the author calls Civilization 3.0, a society that's fluid, alive, and full of possibility, a complete 180 from the frozen, static world of the past. It's a really beautiful vision, isn't it? But it doesn't just happen by magic. To get there, the author says there is one specific step that you have to get exactly right. Everything else depends on it. Yeah, the stakes for that first step, just spreading the ideas, are unbelievably high. Look at this comparison. If you get it right, you get double the results with half the work. But if you mess it up, you'll be working twice as hard and only get half the results.
The entire project, the whole beautiful vision, it all hinges on getting that initial communication right.
So when you boil it all down, it comes to this. One, the number one, the success of this entire grand vision, the thawed lake, the new civilization, all of it, hangs on one single thing: making sure that spring wind of new ideas actually reaches people. That one action is the catalyst. It's the domino that has to fall for any of the rest of it to happen. And that leaves us with a really big question to think about, doesn't it? When we're talking about changing the really deep-seated ideas in our world, the thick ice in our own lives and in our society, is this kind of gentle, persistent spring wind really the only way? Or are there times when a little more force is necessary? It's a tough one, something to chew on. Thanks for joining me.